Hey guys, today we're in the book of Joshua, chapter 9. So we have just come from the mountains of Gerizim in Ebal as they make this covenant. Now they've come back down to Gilgal. You would think of like home base, right, where the women and the children were. And we see an issue that arises. As soon as the kings who are beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland, along the coast of the Great Sea, that's the western coast, the Mediterranean Sea, heard of this, they gathered together as to fight against Joshua and Israel. So the kings of all these little nations are hearing what Israel has done to Jericho, what they've done to Ai, what they've done to Bethel. And so now they're building a coalition, right? These little nations are saying, hey, they're wiping us out. So now they start to build this together. They gathered together to fight against Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions. So here we see a small part of, very small, just a few cities, just really outside of what we would call today modern day Jerusalem. These Gibeonites, they hear of what Israel's doing and they're scared. So what do? They don't run. They're not going to war. They said, hey, we're going to trick ourselves into safety. And so if you read it, it's kind of funny what they do. They go in and they devise a plan that says, hey, we're going to make them think that we're a long way off, and we're going to try to get them to make a peace treaty with us, even though they're really just down the road, right? And so that's what happened. So the Gibeonites rode into Gilgal. Verse 6, it says, we have come from a distant country, not true, just really down the road. And it says, we want you to make a covenant with us. Now, what's interesting about this is we have seen in Exodus chapter 34, also in Deuteronomy chapter 20, God has already told them not to make a peace treaty or a covenant with anybody in the promised land. He's already told them this. But now these people come and say, oh, we're a long ways off, make a peace treaty. God has already said no, but they're not going to listen to God. He says, but the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you're tricking us. Perhaps you live close to us. And how are we to make a covenant with you? And they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? And they said, we're from a very distant country. That's a lie. Your servants came from. And he said, if you don't believe us, check out our bread. We made this bread a long time ago and now it's molded. Check out our clothes. They're rattled and torn. Look at our flip-flops. They're broken. Look at our animals. They're dehydrated. This was all trickery. This was all just picking up old clothes, putting it on. They were just tricking them to the umpth degree. And he says, so our elders and our inhabitants on our country said to us, take provisions in your hand, right? They had sympathy. Joshua in Israel had sympathy, said, well, maybe they are far off. But notice verse 14. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask the counsel of the Lord. In the Hebrew, it really translates, they did not seek the mouth of Yahweh. They did not ask God if they were being truthful or not. Once again, right, we see this with what happened at Ai, right? After Jericho, they went up. They didn't ask God if they were going to go. What happened? 36 people died and they chased them back down, right? They didn't ask God. They're living on this idea of saying, hey, we don't need to ask God. We don't need to do this, even though they just made a covenant with God, right? They just had this huge spiritual experience, but now they're saying, well, we don't need to ask God. We can do our own thing. And so what happens? They make a treaty. In verse 16, at the end of 3 days, it took 3 days for them to find out that they were lied to by the Gibeonites. And the people of Israel set out, reached their cities on the third day. We see that there's cities, 4 or 5 cities just around Jerusalem. And the people of Israel did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation have sworn to them by the Lord. Joshua and the leaders had already made a covenant with the Gibeonites and said, we will not kill you. And so now, if they kill them, even though they were lied to, they are breaking a covenant in God's name. So they can't kill them, but they were lied to. So what are they going to do? This we will do to them. Let them live, lest the wrath be upon us. Joshua says, if we kill them, God's going to punish us because we're breaking a promise that we made in God's name. So what do? They take them as perpetual slaves. Verse 21. And the leaders said to them, let them live. So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation. Verse 23, it says, they will be cutters of wood, drawers of water for the house of my God. From this point forward, all the way through the Old Testament, even including into the New Testament, Gibeonites are now servants of the tabernacle, servants of the temple. They are always to work. They cannot work in the tabernacle. They cannot work in the temple. But remember, all the sacrifices, all the things that they need plenty of wood. They need plenty of water to do washing and cleansing. And so here, the Gibeonites, though they tricked Joshua in Israel, Joshua is going to make them slaves of God, right? So even though they tricked God, right? They tricked the people of God, they will forever be indebted into service into God's kingdom. They will work at his house. Verse 26, so he did this to them, and they delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them, but Joshua made them that day cutters of wood, drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day, right? So they continue all the way through. We see all the way till the end. So here you can see in chapter 9 what we were talking about yesterday, right? Of where is Jesus? Jesus said the two greatest commandments, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. That's what they did at Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim. Blessings and curses, right? We have faith in you. We will do this. But it also says, love your neighbors as yourself. Though they are going in and conquering a land that God has given them full of enemies, and sometimes there is needed war, but here we can see, though they're enemies, they showed a love, not necessarily a love for the Gibeonites. They showed a love for God. And because they made a promise to God, they would show that love of God to their neighbors, to their people. Even though they were treated wrong, they would show them the love of God. And so it's just an important part of what we can see of coming together as kind of what the promised land should be. A people of God that are living there, that are telling the world of how great Yahweh truly is. And so we're starting to see little glimpses of that. Hope that makes sense, and we will see you tomorrow in chapter 10. God bless.